Bonsoir classe. Ce soir, nous allons parler des prépositions. Okay? Today we're going to talk about prepositions of location, and I'm going to introduce disjunctive pronouns probably at a later date, but we may get to it in this installment. So, let's talk about prepositions of location. You guys use prepositions already in English all the time. Those are the words that you use to tell where things are. So, for example, if I want to talk about what's next to me, I would use à côté de. Okay. If I want to talk about what's to the right of me, I might talk about something that is à droite de. Okay. Repeat these after me as we go along. So we'll start again. Next to, à côté de. To the right of, à droite de. To the left of, à gauche de. In, dans. Behind, derrière. In front of, devant. In, en. And I'll qualify this one. En is pretty rare. It's usually used without an article in certain cases, like things like en église. We're not going to worry about en a whole lot, and it's also used for countries. That's the main use we're gonna have for it for our purposes. Facing or across from, en face de. Between, entre. Far from, loin de. By, if I want to talk about, for example, a book that's by someone. This isn't really describing location, but it has to do with belonging and that kind of thing. Par, close to. Près de, under. Sous, and on. Sur. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions. Let's see if you can already use a couple of these. The first question is, où est Snyder par rapport à Walter? If you're having trouble with that question, you have the text of it in the blue box on the lower left on this slide. Où est Snyder par rapport à Walter? I'd like you to write down an answer to that on your sheet of paper that you're going to bring to class tomorrow. Okay, using one of the prepositions on this slide. I'm going to ask you another question now. Same thing. I'd like you to write down your answer, complete sentence, please, on the sheet of paper that you're going to bring to class tomorrow. Où est la salle de Monsieur Summers? Which is W110. If you're not sure. Où est la salle de Monsieur Summers? Then Walter 110. And I'd like you to use entre in your answer this time. Try using entre. So to review those, to come back to those two questions, I'm going to ask them once more really quickly. Remember that you can pause your viewing here on YouTube and answer them on your sheet of paper as long as it takes you. Où est Snyder par rapport à Walter? In the blue box on the lower right, où est la salle de Monsieur Summers? W110, and I'd like you to use entre there. Okay, let's look at à versus en. Okay, I'm going to give you some examples here, and when we're through, I want you to write down on your sheet of paper. You can pause the viewing here. I'd like you to write down when you think we use à and when we use en, considering the examples that are here. With the two kinds of examples here, when do we use à and when do we use en when we're talking about places? Okay. Il étudie à Nice. Elle travaille à Paris. Ils habitent à New York. Elle travaille en France. Ils habitent en Italie. Okay, so quand est-ce qu'on emploie à et quand est-ce qu'on emploie en? When do we use a here, and when do we use en? Okay, now I'd like to talk to you about using tout et juste. We can use tout to qualify prepositions and by saying, and it would be like saying really. Okay, so tout près, really close. We can use juste to say something very similar when we're talking about across from or next to. It could mean just across from or right next to. So just or right in that sense. So let's look at tout first. Here are a couple of examples with tout. Les terrains de tennis sont tout près d'ici. So the tennis courts are really close to here. Le bureau de Monsieur Caldwell est tout près de l'infirmière. Okay. I've got a question for you now. I'd like you to write the answer. It's in the blue box on the bottom left. Quelle maison est tout près de ta maison? Quelle maison est tout près de ta maison? Okay, think about that. How could you answer it? You can pause the recording and answer. Okay, now let's look at juste. La salle de Madame Sanborn est juste en face de la salle 112. La salle de Monsieur Summers est juste à côté de la salle de Madame Sanborn. So again, we're talking about Mr. Summers' room being right next to Madame Sanborn's room. In the first example, we could say that Madame Sanborn's room is right in front of 112 or just in front of 112. Okay. Again, I have a question for you. I'd like you to pause and write your answer in a complete sentence, please. It's in the blue box on the lower right. Juste derrière le foyer des élèves, il y a quoi? Juste derrière le foyer des élèves, il y a quoi? Okay, so now we're going to look at the use of chez. Chez is a pretty unique preposition. We don't really have one quite like it in English. There's one like it in Italian, but at any rate, I'm going to give you these examples, and at the end, let's see if you can figure out. I'd like you just to jot down, and you may or may not get it. We'll talk about it tomorrow. See if you can jot down what you think chez means, okay, how it's used. Marie-Solène est chez sa cousine ce mois-ci. Louise n'aime pas étudier chez Arnaud parce qu'il parle beaucoup et il n'a pas de télé chez lui. Arnaud mange chez Pierre-Adrien ce midi. Demain après-midi, tu arrives chez moi. À quelle heure? Quand est-ce qu'on emploie chez? That's the question I want you to answer on a separate sheet of paper. See if you can use. So finally, since we have time, let's talk about how we use disjunctive pronouns, okay? Or les pronoms disjoints in French. Après les prépositions, remember that après means after, on utilise les pronoms disjoints. You do the same thing in English, okay? Instead of saying she is close to I, you say she is close to me. Or the car is next to him instead of the car is next to he, right? So we change some pronouns when we use them after a preposition. The same thing is going to happen in French. A lot of pronouns are going to change when we use them after a preposition, for to be exact, okay? So let's look at what are which ones change and which ones don't, okay? So instead, after a preposition, instead of saying je, we're going to have to say moi. After a preposition, instead of saying tu, we have to use toi. After a preposition, instead of saying il, we have to use lui. Elle doesn't change. You can use it just like you would a subject pronoun at the beginning of a sentence. You can use it after a preposition. The same applies with nous and vous. They don't change. But when we get to il pluriel, we can't say avec il, for example, or à côté de il, or près d'il. We have to change it to eux. Okay, so we're going to say près de, à côté de, or avec eux. Okay? And finally, elle pluriel doesn't change either. So, instead of saying Maryse travaille à côté de je, as you see on the upper right in red, we have to change that. We would rather, we need to write Maryse travaille à côté de moi. Or we need to say Maryse travaille à côté de moi. Another example, j'aime mieux dîner chez il. We can't say that, but rather j'aime mieux dîner chez eux. Okay, notice the liaison there at the end because we have a Z followed by a vowel. J'aime mieux dîner chez eux. Okay. These are called pronouns disjoints. Remember that we can't use our usual subject pronouns after prepositions. We have to use these. Okay, so that's all I have for tonight. Remember to bring in your answers. I'll be expecting to see those answers tomorrow in class, and we'll go through them, and then we'll work on using les prépositions et les pronoms disjoints in class tomorrow and in the near future. Merci et bonne soirée.